Okay, so we know that the General Allotment Act and the Curtis Act in Oklahoma is a watershed moment, right? This is, in many ways, the moment that we transition away from more tribalist and communalist patterns of life into a more individualistic way of living. One of the things that I think people continue to struggle with is allotment, but I'm wondering if in your conversations with people, if you've heard them say how it is that they feel the effects of allotment in the present day.
Well, I think that the point that comes up, I think on a regular basis, is that of the loss of resources and the land base. Mm-hmm. Because land is so important to identity. There's all sorts of economic rationales and implications from losing your resource base. Right. But we have to remember that allotment is the culmination of a long process of the erosion of native land base and the resources. And then more importantly, it's the imposition of a philosophy that ran counter to the communal tendencies of native societies based on redistribution and reciprocity as opposed to profit. So, allotment was so destructive in so many ways, and it's, I think, undeniable that the ramifications of it still resonate throughout Indian country today, particularly in a place like Oklahoma, where we have the concentration of native peoples and so many different tribal histories and backgrounds, that it was just a real devastating moment. And I think that much of the history of native communities of the 20th century has been about recovery. Mm-hmm. And not just survival and recovery, but resurgence, right. As they've come to terms with the way things are.
It seems to me, too, that insofar as land matters in so many ways, not just economically, but also culturally, that the loss of the land in many ways also meant a loss, or certainly a major threat to aspects of cultural practices, philosophies, too. And so, as you say, just as allotment was a kind of culminating moment for an assault on native lifestyles, we see that was carried out in other ways like boarding schools that we'll see mm-hmm. talked about in some of our materials. Religion, right? At the same time, one of the things that gets complicated about allotment is we've seen that not every American Indian in Oklahoma was opposed to it. Mm-hmm. We're going to read some letters from Alex Posey, for instance, who is all for it in many ways. How do we take stock of these kinds of contradictions?
Well, I think that it's just, one more example of the ways in which Native communities are first and foremost groups of people who possess a broad range of attitudes and opinions about any given topic. I think that this is one of our most important goals for the course, is to dispel that there is a native perspective or a mm-hmm. Kiowa opinion or, right. For goodness sakes, the size of the sheer scale of Cherokee Nation. Right. The incredible diversity that's represented there at every conceivable level, I think, is an important message that often gets obscured, particularly in the academic realm of life. And in my work as an anthropologist, that's one of the sins of our forefathers, I guess.
We've all got them, I'm afraid. Yeah. I think the Cherokees are another good case in point for this kind of diversity. We think about the schools, the boarding schools, for instance, and we are accustomed to hearing about how awful those were, when in fact some of these schools were run by Indian folks themselves, and while they maybe had some assimilationist goals, there are some unofficial histories that went on that were finally about helping people stay together again.
You're talking about contradictions. I mean, to hear people talk about the fact that the boarding school experience at a personal level was resulted in many friendships that lasted, lifelong, very close relationships. A lot of spouses met at boarding school.
So we got more Indians out of them.
But you know, it is, I think, a great example of the double-edged nature of all of this, in that it was a traumatic experience, yet, you know, largely based on resiliency. People made meaningful lives out of those circumstances over and over again.
Right. So maybe it's a good idea now for us to turn to ways in which people are working on resurgence and recuperation.